Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second public stakeholder meeting hosted by the House Bill 413 Interagency Workgroup. I'm Kathleen Borain, and I serve as the Maryland Insurance Commissioner. And I'd like to thank everyone again for their continued participation in this process and for spending your afternoon and possibly early evening with us today to share your thoughts on Maryland's reinsurance program. So as a reminder, in 2022, the Maryland General Assembly passed House Bill 413, which requires the Maryland Administration, in consultation with the Maryland Health Benefit Exchange and the Maryland Health Care Commission, to report to the Governor and the General Assembly by December 1st of this year on the impact of the state reinsurance program. In preparing that report, the MIA is required to consider the necessary level of funding for the program, sources of funding for the program, market reforms needed to provide affordable health coverage in the individual market generally, and design of the program and program parameters in light of existing market reforms at the state and federal level. To complete this report, the MIA formed an interagency work group with representatives from MHBE, MHCC, and the Maryland Department of Health. Representatives of these agencies have been meeting biweekly since February to discuss the topics required to be included in this report. However, stakeholder input is critical to the development of the report, and to that end, we've scheduled 3 initial stakeholder input meetings to solicit ideas and input. The expectation is that after those 3 meetings, there will be work by the work group to develop an initial draft of the report for exposure and additional stakeholder meetings to talk about the draft report and to allow stakeholders to provide additional and more input into the report. The first stakeholder meeting was held on May 11 and included a detailed presentation about the Maryland Reinsurance Program, programs in other states, and market reform mechanisms in use both here in Maryland and in other states. And that was a presentation by the MIA's Chief Actuary, Brad Boban. We then had some really good initial conversation regarding the reinsurance program design, its size, and parameter options. Stakeholders were invited to provide written comments regarding the information provided by Brad and the program design, size, and parameter options. And just as a reminder, the written comment period for those topics is scheduled to close for tomorrow. So if you haven't already provided written comments, and some folks have, please send them by the end of the day tomorrow. That would be very much appreciated. Now, today, we're going to be addressing market reforms beyond reinsurance. We will once again start with a presentation from Brad that's going to focus on market reforms in Maryland and other states, and then invite discussion regarding state-based subsidies, cost share reduction subsidies, and other potential market reforms. Written comments on these topics are also welcome, and we would ask that you provide them by June 9th. When we open up for stakeholder discussion and public feedback, the folks who actually signed up to talk in advance are already brought over and are available just to speak. Just raise your hand and we'll be able to hear from you. But if you didn't, if you're in the sort of the audience group or the attendee group, please just indicate in the chat that you would like to say something or you'd like to participate. And to the extent that time and technology permit, we'll move you over so that we can be heard. So with that, one other housekeeping issue is just to help ensure good sound quality throughout today's meeting and in the recording. If you could stay mute unless you're speaking, that would be great. If you have any technical difficulties, you can reach out to Craig I, either via a direct message in the chat or his email. And his email is in the chat. And as always, we will be posting this recording and materials after the meeting. So just very briefly, before we jump into the agenda, I will introduce the folks who are from the Maryland Insurance Administration who are on the line. We have our Chief Actuary, Brad Boban, is with us today, Senior Actuary, Adam Zimmerman, our Director of Health Insurance Regulatory Affairs and National Partnerships, Jamie Sexton. We have, I believe, our Director of Government Relations, Andrew Tress, and of course, our Chief Communications and Public Engagement Director, Craig I. We are also pleased to be joined by our interagency partners in this project. So first from the Maryland Health Benefit Exchange, to give you guys a chance to say hello and introduce yourselves. Johanna is here, and anyone else from the exchange?
Hi, yes, Johanna Fabian Marks, and with me I also have two policy analysts on my team, Becca Lane and Amelia Marcus.
Great. Well, welcome to you. And then I think from MHCC, I see Ben Steffen and 15 members here.
Thank you, Kathleen. With me is Shankar Mesta, who's Chief of Cost and Quality, and Tracy DeShields, Chief for External Affairs and Policy Development, is also on the Zoom call. Welcome, everyone.
And then from the Maryland Department of Health, if you guys just want to introduce yourselves and say hello today.
Good afternoon, everyone. Alyssa Brown, Director of Innovation, Research and Development. I may be joined by some of my colleagues later in the call, including Marie Grant, our Assistant Secretary for Health Policy, or Tricia Roddy, our Deputy Medicaid Director.
That's great. Thank you. Any other members of the work group that I did not give a chance to say hello? Well, seeing none, I do want to give a shout out to the members of the General Assembly that are here. Thank you. It is really by your leadership that we actually have this work group, this really important work group that's going. I see Senator Griffith, Chair of the Senate Finance Committee. I see Senator Klausmeyer. I see Delegate Kerr, and I apologize if I left anybody out. I know that Delegate Colson is going to be joining us shortly. So if I left anybody out, I apologize, but thank you for the members of the General Assembly for joining us today. Your comments, are particularly important. And Patrick, thank you for being here as well. So with that, I will turn it over to Brad to begin his presentation on market reforms in Maryland and those of other states. Thanks, Brad.
Thank you. Craig, you're gonna tee up the slides, correct?
Yes.
All right, thanks very much. If you could please go to the next slide. The first thing I wanted to do is just level set with the latest uninsured data that we have. This is uninsured data through 2021. That is the most recent that has been released by the U.S. Census's American Community Survey. And this is a comparison between 2019 and 2019 uninsured, 2019 and 2021 uninsured rates. At the top of the page, the overall uninsured rate for Maryland is 6.1%. That's up slightly, not statistically significantly from 2019. So basically flat. But then, when you drill down into different demographics, the first section shows the uninsured rate by age. Some things that stick out here are that the seniors 65 plus, the uninsured rate is under 1%. Medicare, traditional Medicare with Medicare supplement and Medicare Advantage is working well for the seniors and providing good coverage in that demographic. The next lowest uninsured rate by age is the children 0 to 18. That is where Maryland CHIP has a significantly higher threshold than Medicaid for adults. Free CHIP goes up to 211% FPL. Premium CHIP goes up to 322% FPL. So in general, CHIP has helped keep that 0 to 18 lower than all the other ages except for seniors. You'll see that there has been an uptick between 2019 and 2021 from 3.2 to 4.5%. We have not researched what has caused that. It's obviously not what we want to see. But I will say that Maryland is middle of the range as far as uninsured rate goes for this age bracket, nationwide. And then when you look at adults between 19 and 64, you see the highest uninsured rates. The absolute highest uninsured rate was in the 26 to 34 age bracket. It was at 12% in 2019. It came down to 10.4% in 2021. I'll note that this age group is targeted by our young adult subsidy, but this census data predates the young adult subsidy. The big change between 2019 and 2021 was the implementation of the state reinsurance program. So if there's any driver of that minus 1.6% for that age group, it would really be reinsurance. But then you'll also see that, you know, the younger age is 19 to 25 is at 9.2%. And then that 35 to 54 is at 8%. And so you have that whole 19 to 54 age range that really has an elevated uninsured rate relative to the other ages. Then the next section shows by race and ethnicity. And this shows some racial disparities in the uninsured data. You know, the lowest uninsured rate is, you know, amongst the white population of 3%. That's half the statewide average of 6.1%. And then, you know, you have the Hispanic rate at over 20%. And, you know, then you have Asian, Black, and other races, you know, all around the average, you know, a little under 6%. And that race and ethnicity disparity is driven in a large part by the citizenship disparity, which is shown on the bottom of this chart. That for people that are US citizen, the uninsured rate in our state is 4.1%. But for people that are not a US citizen, the uninsured rate is 32%. So almost 1 out of 3 people who are not a citizen are uninsured. And then finally, when you look at the numbers by FPL, you see a strong correlation by FPL and uninsured rate. You've got, you know, by far the highest uninsured rate in that 0 to 138 range, which, you know, are eligible for Medicaid if they're a citizen. And then, you know, the 139 to 250 is also very elevated at 9.9%. The 400% plus, who is the population that reinsurance mainly brings down rates for, has a low uninsured rate of 2.2%. So I just wanted to bring this data out to level set everything and show, you know, where the numbers say that there's need to target as far as reductions of uninsured rates. If you could go to the next slide, please, Craig. So the potential market reforms that we considered were, you know, we looked at what other states have done, and you know, this isn't a completely exhaustive list, but this is the major reforms outside of 1332 reinsurance programs that have been taking place in other states. You've got state premium subsidies, both additional supplemental subsidies for people already receiving federal APTC, and state subsidies for undocumented who are ineligible for federal APTC. You've got cost share reduction subsidies. You've got extended open enrollment opportunities, you know, new additional SEPs to allow additional opportunities to enroll. You've got the individual state mandate / tax penalty. Most of the states that are doing that have modeled it after the federal tax penalty, which has been suspended and is no longer. Then you have merging the individual and small group market, creating a basic health plan for those between 138 and 200, and expanding Maryland Medicaid. So if you could go to the next slide, Craig. So this slide kind of shows a summary of the different considerations that our working group has had as we've been thinking about these different types of reforms. And, you know, I'm going to go down the list and kind of talk through these. You know, the first row says, does it require a 1332? For all of these, the answer is no. All of these reforms can be done without a 1332. But the second row says, is other CMS authority required? And the answer is yes, for merging the individual market or creating a basic health plan or expanding Medicaid. all of those are things that the state has the ability to do under the ACA without needing to pursue a waiver, but they all involve seeking permission from CMS and submitting a plan and CMS authorizing your plan. And so for all of these, even though they are not part of the 1332 waiver, they do influence the 1332 waiver. That's because the 1332 waiver is computing pass-throughs based on comparing how much the federal government would spend in premium tax subsidies in a baseline scenario versus the scenario with reinsurance. And if the state pursues any of these reforms outside of a waiver, then they become part of the baseline scenario. And so to the extent that these reforms change that baseline population, that's why they have an impact on the waiver. And so the way they would impact the waiver is that, as far as pass-throughs go, for the first 4 columns, these all say that there would be a slight increase in pass-throughs. And that would be driven by all of these types of reforms would bring more people into the existing individual market. And those people would have federal subsidies. And so more people with federal subsidies are more potential pass-throughs. And then, but for the basic health plan and Medicaid, there would be a large decrease in pass-throughs. And the dynamic that is going on there is that both of those options would, instead of bringing new people into the individual market, would remove large populations from the individual market and put them either in the Medicaid pool or in their own pool. And so that removal of those people, and those people would be the lower income people between 138 and 200 for the basic health plan and wherever you set your Medicaid threshold. And so you would be removing a large number of people that currently have a large number of federal pass-throughs. And so, that is going to influence your waiver, and, the waiver that is left behind for the remaining population would have significantly lower pass-throughs. But then, pass-throughs are not the whole story. There would also be the reinsurance cost component. And so just like those options would decrease pass-throughs significantly, they would also reduce reinsurance costs. And so, the net impact would depend on how the two changes depend on one another. The one thing to note there is that for the merger of the individual and small group market, there is no impact on pass-throughs, because the small group members aren't currently receiving subsidies, with the exception of a very small shop subsidy. But there would be a large increase in reinsurance costs in that case, because all of the small group members would be part of the reinsurance program and generating reinsurance claims. We looked at administrative complexity, and for the premium subsidies and the new special enrollment periods, those are pretty low complexity. Those are things that have already been done by the MHBE, and which we are set up to do. For cost sharing subsidies or an individual mandate or a merger of an individual and small group, those are all pretty medium complexity things. There are going to be reporting requirements to set up. There are going to be, these are all medium lifts. And then the basic health plan and expanded Medicaid are all pretty high administrative complexity, involving, working extensively with the feds and CMS and waivers, different types of waivers. And then the ease to reverse is the next thing here. And this is just basically the point of, for premium subsidies or cost sharing subsidies, you can start them and stop them. You can have a pilot of, X number of years, and you can stop them. And you leave a market that was basically, unchanged from before you had the subsidy. But for all of the options on the right, you know, these are much less reversible, that if you merge the market or split out the population into the basic health plan or Medicaid, it is not very easy to reverse. It is just as complex to reverse as it would be to implement in the first time. So there's a higher level of commitment for these with the low reversibility. And another aspect we considered was APTC. Right now, APTC is benefiting by the fact that the federal government has stopped funding cost share reduction subsidies. So there is inflated levels of APTC, and that has allowed consumers to be able to buy up to gold a lot. And if you look at the, you know, the enrollment pattern by metal level, you know, between 2018 when CSRs were defunded and now, you've seen a large shift up to the gold medal level. And, you know, these inflated APTCs have allowed members to, you know, to take action. Those who aren't eligible for the cost sharing reduction subsidies can take that expanded APTC and get a gold plan out of it. The basic health plan and Medicaid options take away that benefit, because you take all those people that have the CSR costs and you move them into a separate program. So for the pool that's left behind, it would significantly decrease the APTC. And so that would make, you know, gold much more expensive for everybody that's left behind. So there would be either be the need to, you know, create a state subsidy in addition to these options to offset that and keep the remaining people at the same level, or, you know, it would be a concern with taking one of those options. You've got the impact on the average morbidity of the pool. This is mainly a function by how drastic the pool changes. For, you know, the left options, you've got a mainly intact risk pool with a relatively small number of new people coming in. So the morbidity impact is going to be relatively small. It's going to be a small single-digit morbidity impact. For the options on the right, you are either bringing in a very large number of new people or taking out a very significant number of people. You know, for what it's worth, our data estimates that about 25% of the individual risk pool would be eligible for the basic health plan. So you know, you would be taking 25% of the pool out and leaving 75% behind. So that has the potential for, you know, a meaningful change in morbidity. And it could go either way. You know, it all depends on the relative health status of that population within our risk pool, but just given the fact that it is 25% of the pool, there's the potential for that large impact. And you know, finally, you know, cost to the state for all of these, it's extremely variable and depends, you know, on the specifics of how these are designed. You know, I've got low to high for a lot of these. You know, for some of these, you know, new special enrollment periods, individual mandate, I have low to moderate. You know, I think it's tough to envision a scenario where it's going to be high cost for those reforms. For merging the individual and small group market, I have moderate to high because of that reinsurance cost. I don't think there's a low cost way to do that. But you know, this is kind of the framework of how we were looking at things and comparing these options. And I think with that, Craig, if you could move on to the next slide. So now I'm going to talk about premium tax subsidies, specifically the supplemental ones for those already receiving federal APTC. So currently 7 other states have premium tax subsidies. One state, Washington, has a flat PMPM dollar amount. 6 other states have an APTC-like structure, which targets a certain percent of income. So just like the federal government, their APTC, you know, is based on targeting a percent of income. these 6 states all set targets that are lower than the federal targets, and then back into the federal portion, but by subtracting out what the feds pay. Maryland is the only one of these states that restricts it to an age range. We currently have a young adult subsidy that is for ages 18 through 34. Every other state that is doing this is doing this for all ages. All of these states start the subsidies at 138, the lowest range that goes into a QHP on the exchange instead of Medicaid. And then the top of the subsidies range from 200 to 400%. If you could please go to the next slide. So this graphically compares the different subsidies. The thresholds are down below. Those percentages refer to the percentage of income that a person is expected to pay. The dotted red line at the top is original ACA. And then the solid red line is where ARPA brought things to. And then the other lines are the different states. So you've got the gray line of Massachusetts, and you can see, they were pretty close to ARPA, slightly different slope, but ARPA brought the rates pretty close to where Massachusetts already had them. And then you have New Mexico and Washington, and they have brought their rates meaningfully lower than the ARPA subsidies. And then you finally have Maryland is the bottom yellow line. So you can see that our young adult subsidy right now is more generous, or at the lowest income ranges. Obviously at the lowest income ranges up to 200%. 0 is the floor, and we're not the only state that has as a 0. But at the higher income ranges, you can see that Maryland has the lowest, brings the premium down the lowest compared to the other states. And you can also see that Maryland goes to the highest FPL. We go up to 400%. Other states go up 300%, 350%. We talked to the state health and value strategy team, and part of the reason some states cap things at 300% is that there is a concern that the state subsidy could be considered imputed income and need to be reported on a person's federal tax return. But there is a IRS document that confirms that a subsidy for people under 300% is not imputed income. So it is a gray area over 300%. Nobody has, the IRS has not tried to claim that anybody should be paying taxes on those, but there is no affirmative IRS ruling about that. So the 300% threshold is a more common limit in other states. Next slide, please, Craig. So this just gives some more detail in a slightly different format. The top half of this page is focused on the premium tax subsidies. Once again, all of these percentages on this page are a percentage of a person's income. You've got the original ACA on the left. You can see for the higher incomes, there is no limit. That it goes up to 9.12% for 400% FPL. Then you've got ARPA, and you can see that they put that limit in for every income. Nobody has to pay more than 8.5%. And then they also brought the limits down for each and every income range. California is one state that was not shown on the previous slide, and that's because they had a state subsidy that they suspended when ARPA was implemented. You can see, that the California subsidies were not as generous as the ARPA subsidies. And so California, rather than leaving their subsidy on top of ARPA, decided to suspend their subsidies and save that money until ARPA runs out. And so, but these are what California had, but before ARPA, they are unique in that they did have subsidies for over 400%. And, you can see these income caps, they are higher income caps than the feds have with the 8.5%, but they are income caps at those higher incomes. And then, you have Massachusetts. As we saw graphically, Massachusetts isn't that far off from the federal ARPA subsidies. They're a little higher at 200% FPL, 2.8% versus 2. They're a little bit lower at 300% FPL, 4.85% of income versus 6. Then, Vermont, New Mexico, and Connecticut all have their structures as well. The percentages are outlined here. And then something to note is that Massachusetts, Vermont, New Mexico, and Connecticut all have cost share reduction subsidies in addition to premium subsidies. And so, they are generally coordinated, the same range of incomes that are eligible for premium tax subsidies are eligible for cost sharing reduction subsidies. That's obviously not the case from the federal subsidy perspective. Cost share reductions are available up to $250, while APTC is up to $400. But on a state level, it does make a lot of sense to say if this is the population we're going to target, we're going to target it consistently with respect to these two types of subsidies. Next slide, please, Craig. All right, so this is an example that I wanted to go through to talk about an issue with subsidies that are structured like ours, like 6 out of the 7 states are doing, modeled after the federal structure. So this is the premium for an age 30 Baltimore Metro. These are 2023 premiums. And so going through the top table, in that first column, you have the unsubsidized premium of $296 for every income level. And then you have the federal APTC. This is the current ARPA APTC. And you can see, at the lowest income level at 150% FPL, it's the full subsidized amount. As a caveat, I've also simplified things by ignoring non-EHB. In actuality, the feds don't subsidize a lot of plans down to true zero. They subsidize it down to $1 or $2. This is a simplified example that assumes true zero. But the point is that the federal subsidies are, extremely weighted towards the lowest incomes. And so, you have almost $300 a month in subsidy for that lowest income. And then you can see, as the income goes up at 300% FPL, that federal subsidy has dropped to $92. And then, at 350% it's down to $9. And then at 400% it's down to 0. And in this case, it is 0 because that person is eligible for a subsidy if the unsubsidized premium was more than 8.5% of their income, but the unsubsidized premium is not more than 8.5% of their income. It's only 6.5% of their income, and so they don't need a subsidy. But so the federal pattern is very high subsidies for low incomes, grading down quickly to 0 for the higher incomes. And the next column shows where that leaves the premium after the federal subsidy, and then it shows the current state subsidy structure. And so, at 150% FPL, the state subsidy is 0 because that person is already at 0 and there's a floor at 0 for subsidies. But then you can see that as the income increases, the state subsidy increases. So at 200% FPL, it's $45 a month. At 250, it's $71 a month. It goes up to $99 a month for 350% FPL. And so this is a regressive structure, and this is kind of, something that was hidden and not evident when we set the subsidy up this way. if you look at the following column, the premium after the state and the federal subsidy, the premiums themselves are not regressive. You've got the lowest premiums at the lowest income, and premium increases as you expect by income. But because we are subsidizing a flat percentage of income, it becomes a regressive subsidy. So when we talk to state health and value strategies, another recommendations of theirs was to take the Washington approach and to do a flat PMPM. And once again, a flat PMPM would still be floored at, your premium can't go below zero. So even in a flat PMPM, not everybody is going to get that PMPM, but you would either get that PMPM or a lower prorated amount to get your subsidy to zero. So this is an alternative example of how a subsidy could be structured. The chart down below shows things as a percent of income. Once again, you can see with the unsubsidized, if there was no subsidies, people with the lowest incomes would be paying 17% of their income towards these premiums. Instead they are paying 0%. But this compares the different structures. Thanks, Johanna. Yeah, so PMPM is per member per month. So sorry, that bit buried in my actuarial terms, but yeah. So these are monthly amounts, monthly subsidies amounts, monthly premium amounts. Next slide, please, Craig. So this shows the same example, but with a 60-year-old instead of a 30-year-old, just to illustrate how much higher the federal subsidies get for older ages. Because ultimately, the targeted premium for lower income people does not vary by age. So if you are 250% FPL, you're expected to pay the same $113 in premium regardless of your age. And so that means that for older ages, because the unsubsidized premiums are age rated, and age 64 is 3 times the premium of age 21. So for these older premiums, you have very large federal subsidy amounts. And then, in this example, you can see, the current state subsidy, increases through all incomes in this example, because that 60-year-old is eligible for the state subsidy at 400% FPL. Once again, the alternative kind of flat structure that would be possible. This flat structure was just a number that was chosen by me as an illustration. It could be any number. It could be a higher number. That is part of what will be modeled out. Different levels of subsidy, but within the modeling, choosing what kind of structure to model out is a key assumption. That's why I'm bringing up this illustration. Next slide, please. All right, this slide is a little hard to see, but this is the standard plans for the 2024 plan year. The exchange has had value plans since 2019, which have had requirements that have limited deductibles and limited what the deductible could apply to. As of 2024, they are standardizing the plans, and these are the standardized plans. What I wanted to bring out here is the typical type of cost shares that members are paying. And so the rows I would point you to are the top few rows. The first row is the actuarial value. The second and third rows are the medical and drug deductibles. And so if you add them together, you'll see the total deductible at the lowest levels for the CSR 94%. That means the cost share has been brought up, the actuarial value has been brought up to 94%, and there's a $0 deductible. And then the two rows below that are the medical and drug out-of-pocket max, and so you add those together and you have a $2,000 out-of-pocket max. So people who are eligible for the 94% CSR, which is those between 138 and 150% FPL, they are going to have a plan that has a $0 deductible, a $2,000 out-of-pocket max, and then all the co-pays listed below on the various services. And then likewise, as you move from left to right from that CSR 94, the CSR 87 is for that next highest income bracket. It's for people between 150 and 200% FPL. This has a slightly lower target of 87% actuarial value. What that looks like in practical terms is that they have a total deductible of $1,150, and they have a total out-of-pocket max of $3,000. And then moving to the next highest income, you've got people between 200% and 250% FPL. They're in the CSR 73% plan. That plan has very little subsidization. A base silver plan is 70%, and so this is a 73%. So there's only about 3% of cost share being reduced in this option. And that's reflected in the significantly higher deductible and out-of-pocket max. You've got $5,250 deductible and a $7,550 out-of-pocket max. And so that is almost as high as the base silver plan. The deductible is the same, $5,250. The out-of-pocket max is slightly lower than the base out-of-pocket silver plan. And so wanted to put this in context and put this out there. And the next slide, I've put that into a percent of income kind of basis as we were looking at premium. So Craig, if you could move on to the next slide. So the left side of this chart puts our standard plan into a percent of income for the deductible and the out-of-pocket max. And in general, we get data from the carriers. Only about 3% of people are hitting their out-of-pocket max in a given year, the sickest 3% of people. But in general, if you have a high cost event like a hospitalization, your out-of-pocket spending is probably going to come in somewhere between this deductible and this out-of-pocket max. And so at the lowest income level, the deductible is 0% of income. The out-of-pocket max of $2,000, that's 9.8% of income. So worst case scenario for that person, they've got to shell out almost 10% of their income in cost sharing in a bad year where they have to use a lot of health services. That next row, 200% FPL, you can see the deductible is now 4% of their income, and the out-of-pocket max is now 11% of their income. It's a little bit worse, but not horrible. But then when you go to that 250% FPL range, you can see that $5,250 deductible and $7,550 out-of-pocket max. This person would have to pay between 15.5% and 22.2% of their income in a really bad year where they had a hospitalization. And similar numbers in that 300% row. And then as the income starts increasing from there, the out-of-pocket maxes and deductibles don't keep getting higher, and so as a percent of income it drops. But the states that are targeting cost share reduction subsidies are really targeting that under 300% FPL range, and that is where these people are paying a very significant amount of their income if they have to use their services. So one example is to the right. This is modeled after how Massachusetts has their plan set up. And for that, the two lowest income groups, the 150 to 200, they've got a $0 deductible, a $1,250 out-of-pocket max. That represents a 97% AV. On average, the insurance company is paying 97% of claims, and the member covers 3%. That keeps cost sharing down around 5 or 6% of income for these members. And then at the 250 to 300% range, they've got an AV of 92%. And they've achieved that with their standard plans, have $0 deductibles as well, but then they have a $2,250 out-of-pocket max instead of a $1,250 out-of-pocket max. And so, they've brought the maximum cost sharing for this income range down also, to that same 5 or 6% range. But then you can see, they're not doing anything for people over 300%. And so, if you're at 350% FPL in Massachusetts, you could pay the same amount as somebody in Maryland, which is, the federal 9,100 maximum, which has been raised again, I think, to 9,450 for next year for the rates we're going to be reviewing soon. I mean, it's indexed to inflation, and that 9,100 goes up every year. Years and years ago, it started out down at 6,000 in line with HSAs, but it indexes up pretty quickly. So it should be over 10,000 by 2025, the federal maximum. Next slide, please, Craig. So this shows the same thing, except for a family of 4. So the income thresholds for a family of 4 are higher than an individual. For a family of 4, you would be at 150% FPL if you were earning $41,000 a year. And 400% FPL, you're at $111,000 a year. But this shows, for a family of 4, unsubsidized premium over $1,000, federal APTC, once again, very high at the low incomes, grading down, and then the current state subsidy, and then the alternative flat subsidy kind of structure. Next slide, please, Craig. And this shows the family cost sharing dynamic, which is analogous to what's going on to the individual. In general, a family out-of-pocket max is limited to double of the individual level. And so, that means for people of higher incomes, that federal number is $18,200. For people, at the lowest income levels, you still got a $4,000 out-of-pocket max for a family that's at 150% FPL. Matt, I saw your question pop up. Yes, deductibles do go to out-of-pocket maxes. I am not showing these to say that you have to pay the deductible then the out-of-pocket max. I'm kind of showing it to show a range of spending for people with moderately high expenses that, in good faith, I didn't want to focus on out-of-pocket max because I know only 2 or 3% of people hit their out-of-pocket max, and it takes truly an exceptionally bad year to hit your out-of-pocket max. The deductible, a much higher percentage of people hit their deductible, and it doesn't take an exceptionally bad year to hit your deductible. It takes 1 hospitalization to hit your deductible, or 1 expensive specialty drug to hit your deductible. So, this is meant to be a range of, spending for people with high costs. But yeah, you should not add these two together. The out-of-pocket max is the worst case. The deductible is a less worst case, but was still someone with significant costs. So thank you for bringing that up. Next slide, please. All right. So yeah, that was all the slides I had to go through. Before we started the discussion, did anybody have any questions about any of the slides I went through, and I want to revisit anything?
Hey Brad, this is Johanna. I just wanted to make one kind of clarifying comment, which folks may have picked up on, but just in case not, some of the slides with the state subsidy examples may have shown examples for children or 60-year-old individuals who wouldn't be currently eligible for a young adult subsidy. I think we were just showing those as an illustration of if the state subsidy applied to all ages, what that would look like. But currently our state subsidy is only for 18 to 34. Is that a fair way to characterize that, Brad?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, that's definitely true. Yeah, there is no state subsidy right now for age 60, and you know that column on that slide is what if we applied our current structure to that age group. And it's meant to contrast the structure, but yeah, you're correct. There is no current subsidy, and but I'm taking the current subsidy structure and applying it to that age. All right. Well, if there are no more questions about the slides, then I guess we can move into discussions. So, you know, these are the discussion topics on this slide that I put together about the supplemental state premium subsidies for those who are already eligible. So, you know, is the current threshold of 400% for young adults appropriate, or should it be lowered? You know, I don't think raising it is really supported or, you know, in the cards, but I think, you know, there may be a case to lower it, you know, to 300%, for instance. And then, you know, should the subsidy be expanded to additional ages? You know, when we looked at the uninsured rate by age, you know, there is definitely a high uninsured rate in, you know, that 35 to 55 age group. Does it make sense to expand to all ages? Maybe not. You know, maybe children, it doesn't make sense since shift already goes up so high. You know, it would be very duplicative. Maybe it doesn't make sense to expand to all ages, but, you know, do we want additional ages? You know, should that structure be changed? Are we concerned about the regressiveness of our structure and the fact that, you know, we're giving more dollars on a monthly basis to higher income? And you know, do we want to change to a flat PMPM both for structural purposes and for administrative ease? You know, it was not the easiest thing to set up the current subsidy structure, and it continues to be a challenge to implement it. And a flat PMPM certainly, you know, has the pro of being much easier to implement. And you know, there's a greater question of should we consider suspending any state subsidy until ARPA expires. You know, California has chosen to take that approach. You know, that could be a longer term, you know, wiser approach as far as money goes. You know, don't spend the money in the current years when ARPA is, you know, significantly lowering rates, and save that state subsidy money for, you know, if ARPA expires and there really is a need for you know, state subsidies to come in and replace those ARPA subsidies that are lost. And then, you know, just in general, you know, what level of subsidy is appropriate, and you know, should we be targeting $0 premiums for, you know, certain incomes? You know, right now federal subsidies get people to 0 up to 150% FPL. Our state young adult subsidy gets people down to 0 for 200% FPL. You know, is that appropriate and necessary? Should some of those people be paying more than 0, or do we want to expand that even more and get people down to 0 at higher incomes? And you know, and then at the top end of the range, you know, is that 8.5% that ARPA is bringing things down to enough? You know, or do we need to go even lower, you know, for certain incomes? So
Brad,
yeah.
I mean, and so for everybody, this is a dense conversation, right? So very dense slides that We sent out, with a short period of time to look at them, a lot of information in those slides. And, Brad is correctly, walking through, a 1,000 questions that, they present, a lot of different discussion points and options, right? So this is not going to be the only opportunity to be heard and to give your thoughts, right? So I want to make that really very clear, that this is preliminary discussion. It's an opportunity for people to react and to, share their thoughts, the thoughts that they've come into the meeting with and that have come up in the meeting. And we want to make sure that we try to hear from everybody. Don't feel totally constrained about the discussion topics. This is really intended to be a rich sharing of thoughts and ideas with many more opportunities to give input. But let me start with Johanna, who has her hand up, and then we really want to hear from everybody what your thoughts are and your questions, both to Brad and to Johanna and others, obviously, who contributed to putting this information together.
Thank you. And yeah, I really just wanted to make some similar framing remarks that what we're hoping to get out of this conversation is some feedback that will help shape modeling that we'll do of different scenarios to include in the report and to kind of lay out for consideration. And so it's okay if you're not, you don't know, like you don't have a specific number in mind, but you can provide feedback along the lines of, yes, I think it would be good to consider expanding the subsidy to all ages. And I would like to see a scenario in which that is modeled. Or I think that maybe 400% seems like it could be too high based on the uninsured data. And, I think that whatever subsidy you model, you should consider reducing that, that threshold. So it can be more kind of directional feedback that helps us think about how we shape the modeling that we do following this meeting.
Thank you, Johanna. I think Deb had her hand up. Deb Rifkin.
Thanks, Commissioner. I think similar to what you just described, this is a lot to digest, right? And obviously we have to have a whole team look at this to make any type of determinations of what makes sense. But I can tell you that generally, having state premium subsidies is a great idea, and having additional subsidies, cost sharing reduction subsidies is a great idea, but it's hard to figure out what makes sense until you know what the pot of money is. It's like any budget, right? If I make $1 million, I know I need a car, I know I need a house, but depends which house and car I'm going to get depending on my budget. And so it's really difficult, at least from my perspective, is knowing I'd like to do both, but it depends what money we have. And so it's real. I kind of feel like we're putting the cart before the horse unless you have ideas that can help us. And where's that money going to come from? So one of the things you've heard CareFirst say since the beginning of the reinsurance program, and we will continue to say it, is we really think there has to be independent funding sources for this, because every time you pull out of the reinsurance money, we've got less money for reinsurance and for the success of the program. So if people agree with me, which I hope, then we got to figure out where are those funding sources and what are we going to do? And once we know what pot it is, then I think we can figure out what makes most sense. Do we want to do both CSRs and premium subsidies, or how much in each? But to start pulling those strings and coming up with the parameters is quite difficult, not knowing what the money's going to be.
Thank you. I mean, I do think it's an iterative process and they're interrelational. So I think there is some desire to see, well, what would things cost as part of the modeling? But let me go to Senator Griffith.
No, thank you. And let me thank you for that presentation and the information. I've been texting Patrick, having him give me the acronym breakdown throughout the presentation. I do appreciate that one of the things that caught me is when you shared the regressive nature of some of the things that we've been doing in the past. That has been a concern that I've been expressing, just making sure we're providing the most help to our most vulnerable. But I wanted to associate myself with a part of what Deb Rifkin just said, and that is I was not sure if it was me and the fact that just having this level of conversation is somewhat new to me. I don't have a sense of the cumulative fiscal impact of any of the things that we're considering. And so I do get the benefits of all of the alternatives that you've presented, but I don't have a sense of comparing if we decided to go with the flat premium. If we went with the flat rate for people regardless of income versus the percentage, what that cost would look like compared to some of the other options you presented. So I understand, Madam Director, this is an ongoing conversation, but those are some of the things that I would love to hear before I kind of weigh in terms of an opinion. So thank you.
Welcome. Mr. DeMarco.
Thank you very much, and thank you so much for including us in this discussion. And like the Senator and Deb said, thanks for the incredibly great presentation, a lot of work into this. On this discussion topics, these are, as you say, very dense, and we'd have to do a lot of thinking about them, except for the last one, where I can tell you on behalf of the Maryland Healthcare for All Coalition, we say absolutely no to that because we don't think the youth subsidy should be discontinued. They're very, very successful. Thank you, Elga Kerr, Senator Griffith, and Senator Klausmeyer, and the legislators who made this happen. And we know 17,000 new young people have gotten enrolled, 46,000 young people have been helped by it. We should not discontinue this. And I'm hopeful that the ARPA will continue forever, for a long time. But we should not discontinue the youth subsidies. And thank you, the exchange, for implementing it so well. But also, I want to agree with Deb Rifkin very much, and what Senator Griffith said, that we need to figure out funding sources. As you all probably know, in the past, we advocated for public health revenue measures that have expanded healthcare even before the Affordable Care Act, increase in tobacco taxes and alcohol taxes, which reduced teen smoking and underage drinking and funded healthcare. I believe it's important that we think about funding sources like those, which would enable to create the funding that Deb talks about, that we could use to determine how much subsidies we could provide. Just FYI, there was a bill introduced this session by Delegate David Frazier Hidalgo and Senator Ben Cramer, which would have put a penalty on polluters, big polluters, and raised $9 billion. And they asked us to describe how to spend 20% of it on healthcare. With the exchange's help, we gave them language on doing that would have covered everybody. Not saying that that's viable, but that was a bill in this session. But I completely agree that we should look for something like that. And thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you. Ms. Hodson.
Hello. So I just wanted to weigh in a little bit for public comment, both as a consumer and as a navigator who helps people enroll in health insurance and navigate some of the insurance plans on the exchange, that if we want to capture additional people into the exchange, one of the things that they're most concerned about is cost. And I know that, you know, it's hard to have this robust discussion where we don't know what our budget is and where that money might be coming from. But I think that expanding some of that subsidy to additional ages, especially up towards that 55 age mark where we saw some drop-offs of people really enrolling, and possibly expanding the FPL maybe to 300% from the 250% for zero, for that like zero deductible plan, I think would help consumers feel more comfortable enrolling into insurance. One of the things that I've noticed as I help people navigate insurance and enrollment is that they're not only looking at those monthly costs, but they're also looking a lot about their copays and their out-of-pocket expenses. And anytime they feel like they're getting a subsidy or any type of discount, it encourages them to enroll, and not only to enroll, but to remain enrolled throughout the year in insurance, because there are some times where people might initially initially enroll. And then as the year goes by, they feel like, well, maybe I can just drop off, or this is getting too expensive for me. So I think maybe expanding some of those premium subsidies and possibly changing to a flat rate, or possibly, just expanding that subsidy to additional ages could help people not only to expand enrollment, but also to remain enrolled throughout the year.
No, thank you for those comments. I do want to remind folks and that we are going to have an opportunity to talk on June 29th about the cost scenarios, and then we can also begin to talk about the sources. And I appreciate there's kind of a chicken and the egg thing that's going on here. I think there has been a desire from the team to get people's sense of, like, for example, Senator Griffith's comments about the aggressive nature. And so is that something that we should be focusing on when we do the next step, which is to do the modeling and begin to talk about what the costs of some of these things are, so that there are some things like, Vinny's comment that, look, that part should be completely off the table. You should not stop the subsidies. So that's informing Johanna and Brad in particular, as they work with our actuaries and the actuarial team on thinking about what are we modeling and what are the options. So you are all absolutely correct that nobody can decide any of this in an economic vacuum, but it will help drive, what the options that are being modeled. If we have those sort of parameters of, boy, this is an awful idea, or this one is very interesting. So.
And yeah, just to add to that, I mean, there is definitely going to be a range of costs being modeled for these different things, and we're just trying to narrow down that range to the most useful range. And it's understood, when we come back with the cost for, the ideal wish list of doing everything that everybody wants to do, it's going to be too high, and we're going to have to be, making some trade-offs, but it's being able to model each of these different components and get a reasonable range for cost for each of the components, and then bring that back and be able to have, a range of costs for each of these things, and balance and discuss, relative to one another, how much these different programs cost and how much we want to focus on each.
So if we have, yes, Ms. Clapper.
Thank you. So I don't have the answers to all of these questions, but I guess just some considerations. One is for the threshold for young adult subsidies. I think it's important to remember that one of the purposes of a young adult subsidy is to try to attract young adults who are the most likely to be uninsured, and are also more likely to be healthy, and attract them into the market to help stabilize it for everybody. So any discussion about changing the threshold, I think it's just important to keep that in mind. Our mission is quality, affordable healthcare for all Marylanders. So if there was a way to maintain the current threshold and expand it to additional ages, of course, we would be very excited about that. And then this question about changing the structure of the subsidy to a flat PMPM. Of course, we want to be progressive. We don't want to be regressive. But I'm not really sure where to fall on here. And like when we're looking at what the level would be, just the example that was given in the slide, it ends up being that actually almost all of the threshold, all of the federal poverty level threshold groups have to pay more in the end, because of the way that the flat state subsidy was set to 45, the state is contributing less to the program as a whole. And so people up to 200% of the federal poverty level aren't affected, but then anyone 250% to 400% are all paying more. And so I guess technically it's not regressive, but it also boosts everyone's costs above 250%. So
I want to caution you about reading too much in that. This is an example I came up with, and just as far as this structure goes, I did not do an actuarial calculation to solve for an equivalent subsidy, I just picked a number and was trying to do an illustration, and I think I did not pick the best illustrative number, but as far as this structure question, neither structure inherently costs more or less than the other. It all depends on the parameters, and the actuaries, it is possible to do the actual actuarial calculation that would be neutral and not be a reduction overall, but would redistribute things. But that was not done in this illustration. So I just wanted to make that clear that, if it was done, that 45 I came up with would probably not be the number. It would probably be a higher number. And there would be winners and losers. The winners would be the lower income people, that the higher income people would be getting less, but it would not be unbalanced like that. So I just want to clarify that, that was me trying to throw together an illustration, but they are not equivalent, and that is not some inherent aspect of switching to the flat PMPM.
But that is a very valuable comment, Ms. Clapper, that anything that we're going to model and we're going to be looking at, we want to make sure that at the end of the day, we're not reducing, necessarily what the state is contributing, and that we're not being in that sense, regressive with people who are at the lower range of income, because you are correct. That is a very important, control element.
Yeah, I mean, I picked that 45 because it is close to the average we are actually giving out. But obviously, in the illustrative example where I'm showing all the incomes, the average is much different. And so, that's part of the disconnect there. And why the average state subsidy is so low, it has to do with a lot of different factors. But that's the disconnect in that exhibit, that, it was representative of the average of what's actually being given out. But that chart that shows the different incomes, it makes it look like the average should be a lot higher than it is. But yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
Thanks for the clarification.
Before we move on to the next topic, I just want to make sure if anybody else had their hands up, I don't see it. But let's ask if there's anyone among the attendees, if you want to speak or comment on this particular set of questions that Brad has thrown out there, and you want to be brought over to be heard, just please note that in the chat function, and Mr. I will bring you over so that we can hear your comments. But short of that, and without anybody else's hand, Brad, you want to, or Joanna, whoever is proposed to do the next set, do you want to go on to the next set of topics?
Yeah, Craig, if you could go to the next slide, please. All right, so the next topic I wanted to bring up was the premium subsidy for those ineligible due to immigration status. So, from that first slide we showed, 32% uninsured rate, and this is definitely a population that needs to be addressed. But there are definitely questions about modeling out any subsidy for this population. In general, other states have done this, have designed their state subsidies to replicate what the federal subsidies would have been. Is that how we would want our subsidy to be structured? If so, at the ARPA level, so that there is parity, or at the normal ACA level. The ARPA level is obviously going to be more expensive, but it's going to achieve, rate parity, for people shopping on the marketplace. Then you also have, the alternative of a PMPM structure. Other states that are doing this are not doing a PMPM structure. The PMPM structure is progressive compared to our regressive state subsidy, but the federal subsidy is much more progressive than a flat PMPM. It gives much higher PMPMs to low levels. So, if we did a PMPM structure here, it would be less progressive than the first option of mirroring the federal subsidies. A lot of other states that are saying things to this population are limiting things to specific ages. And I think, you know, the question would be, would we want to do the same thing here? And you know, I think for this one, you know, on the supplemental policy, I said we would probably not want to expand it to ages 0 to 18 because of CHIP. But this population is not eligible for CHIP. And so, you know, do we need or want to target 0 to 18? Do we want to target young adults as we are targeting for the current state subsidy? Do we want to target other ages? You know, that is a big question for the modeling here. The income question, you know, do we go 138 all the way up to 400, or do we do some subset of that? You know, do we do 138 to 200 or 138 to 300? And then, you know, do we study the cost for 0 to 138? You know, there is a separate work group that is studying the cost of expanding Medicaid to include this population for 0 to 138, but to get the other data point of what would it cost if instead of expanding Medicaid, we made these people QHP eligible and eligible for the subsidy. You know, do we need to include them in the study? And, you know, if we are doing a supplemental state subsidy and not suspending it like California, are we going to make all of these members that are eligible for the, you know, for this subsidy also eligible for that supplemental subsidy? And, you know, that will dictate the interplay between the two sets of modeling and whether or not one would, you know, impact the other. So, you know, any thoughts on any of these topics are welcome. You know, and you know, yeah, I'll leave it like at that.
And I know how my head is spinning. And I talked to these guys about this. So I think what's most important today is having walked through this information and getting an understanding of where the working group is and how the working group is thinking about what's going to get modeled and what the variations might be. If you have comments today, I'm going to get to Ms. Clapper in just 1 second. We absolutely want to hear that, but you also have some time to put your thoughts into writing and send them to us, because again, the next step is for the work group to get together and talk about the variations that are going to be modeled, because it's not just like one and done. It will be several different scenarios that get modeled that will all be provided, and then we will get back together again to walk through those models, which will provide some economic context to the various choices. So let me start with Ms. Clapper, and then Delegate Collison, welcome. Thank you.
Delegate Collison, feel free to go before me if you would like. I'm okay either way.
Thank you, Stephanie. I appreciate that. And thank you, Commissioner. I guess I'm not prepared to answer particular questions. I do have one question, but I want to thank you for including this, and so that it goes into the calculations as we really work to make sure that we're covering all Marylanders. So I do appreciate this slide being here and the fact that we are actively thinking about it. Well, the one question that I have, and maybe this is too much in the weeds, and if it is, we can just, you know, not worry about it, but I am wondering if there's if it's effective or appropriate if we were to do something different with a different population. So if we're not using the PM structure in other parts of the exchange, would we want to do it for one part of the exchange, I guess? And so I'm thinking this may have greater implications than simply the this population of folks, the folks who are ineligible due to immigration status. Brad, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the questions are I think a PMPM can exist alongside the not PMPM for this purpose, that, you know,
Okay.
that, you know, this subsidy, the immigration status subsidy, you know, would basically be replicating what the federal subsidy would have been, and you know, putting that, you know, due to the state, and then, you know, you can still have a separate PMPM subsidy to add on as the state supplemental subsidy. And so, yeah, I don't think that's an issue, and you can make different decisions here than there. And you know, that if the answer is that we want these members to get both subsidies, that it would be fine, that, you know, it would, you know, end up working just like it does for everybody else, except the only difference would be the federal portion would be covered by the state, and the state supplemental portion would be covered by the state.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Brad. I appreciate that. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you. Ms. Clapper.
Thank you. I don't have the answers to all these questions, but I am interested in seeing modeling for providing subsidies at the same level as everyone else in the marketplace is getting. And so I would be interested in seeing at the ARPA level, because this is a population that, you know, if your income is $20,000, it doesn't really matter who you are. I mean, it's not just by some, because if you're undocumented and you make $20,000, you're not going to have more ability to pay for your premium than someone else who makes $20,000. So you should be able to get the same amount of subsidy, I think. And also another consideration is that this is a population that has less generational wealth. And so there are going to be fewer family members potentially who can help contribute to overall costs in someone's budget. And so if anything, I think, you know, this group, you know, might have a lot of needs for help affording their premiums. And so I think any discussion about should we be funding them at a lower level than anyone else in the market is potentially going to keep people out of the marketplace. Even if they are eligible for a subsidy, they still might not be able to afford it.
Thank you. Vinny, I saw your camera come on. Did you want to comment? Okay. Yes. Ms. Fierstead, did I get that? Did I pronounce that correctly?
It's close. It's
Okay.
Fierstead. Thank you so
Fierstead.
much. Appreciate it. Just wanted to offer one thought. And you may have already had conversations with the Washington State folks, but they have gotten approval from CMS to allow undocumented persons to purchase coverage on exchange, and will be offering state subsidies up to 250%. And because they went through the 1332 process to do that, they actually did include some modeling that might be worth looking at, just to see if there are some parameters within their modeling that would be useful to help scope the modeling here. And just wanted to offer that we really strongly support the concept of offering subsidies and getting at this population. And, you know, certainly wanted to also acknowledge the current federal proposed rule related to DACA recipients. So there's a lot going on here, a lot to think about, but wanted to offer the Washington State perspective in case that provides some parameters that are helpful for modeling purposes.
Thank you for that. Senator Griffith, did you want to comment?
Yes, thank you. And I appreciate all of the conversation and the input thus far. I do want to go back to something that Vinny said earlier that I think is important for the conversation as the work group moves forward. Where the resources come from is going to be critical. The pie is finite right now. And while we would all love to say, you know, the greatest subsidy for all Marylanders so that we could, you know, just make sure that everyone is covered at the highest level possible, we do have to recognize that as we expand the footprint of those who are covered in Maryland, we will have to figure out where the resources come from. And that's why I keep raising the issue of making sure that we consider the most vulnerable, and that as we look at resource availability, we consider that we may have to go back to the rest of Maryland to ask for some other funding source if we're going to expand this. And so if funding source equals tax increase, we may be need to have that conversation in context of other conversations that we're having around the increases in our education cost and other things. So I just want to continue to keep that conversation balanced and say that we may not be able to do everything all at the same time that we would love to do until we have that resource path available to us. And what that looks like, I'm not sure. The proposals that have been before the General Assembly, we have done a phenomenal job thus far, but it's because we've been very thoughtful and careful about not putting the cart before the horse. And I hope we continue to do that.
Thank you. Don't see any other hands up or anybody else who's come on screen. Brad, are you familiar with the Washington State's modeling? I know that we looked at their waiver materials.
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, we are familiar with it. We did look at it, and yeah, I mean, I guess, that leads me to clarify, I had said on an earlier slide that the 1332 was not required for subsidies. And technically it's not, it's definitely not for the supplemental subsidy. You could technically do this kind of subsidy off exchange, but we would want to pursue this aspect of the subsidy via the 1332 waiver if the state went down this path, modeled after that Washington method, because that's the delivery system of on the exchange for the subsidies definitely makes the most sense. But it's those supplemental subsidies from their previous page that we don't want to include in 1332. We would actually hurt ourselves if we included the other subsidies in the 1332. So that's bifurcated there, and I think that's worth clarifying at this point.
It would be an administrative nightmare to try to do it otherwise through the exchange for this particular, and you would lose things like, if the DACA, regulation goes into effect and if the federal subsidies become available.
Yeah, we would not want to go that way. Yeah, if we want to go down this path, we would definitely intend to do this part of the subsidy as part of the waiver.
And I'll just add that I've been in regular contact with the policy lead at the Washington Exchange on their implementation of this. So we definitely have had good conversations and have a direct contact there.
I don't see any other raised hands. So let me once again invite any of the attendees who want to be heard on this topic to let us know that in the chat. And Craig will bring you over. But short of seeing that, Brad, you want to take us to the next set of questions that you're trying to get insight into? And, again, happy to take written comments offline. This is really about giving Brad and Johanna your initial thoughts so that as they begin to shape what our modeling looks like. And really the whole work group is shaping that.
Thanks, Craig. Yeah, thank you. So the next topic I want to talk about was cost sharing subsidies, and the general questions here are, what incomes would we want to model getting cost share subsidies? Based on the other states that are doing them, under 300% or under 250% seem like the main two choices. I would lean towards under 300%, but it's obviously going to be more expensive the higher you go. And then, what AV should the lowest incomes have? Do they need anything additionally? These people are already at 94% actuarial value, but as I showed on the slide, that it still means you have an out-of-pocket max of $2,000. When you're making a $25,000 a year is an out-of-pocket max of $2,000 too high? Should they be subsidized up to, you know, 97, 99, all the way up to 100? And then, you know, the next higher income, that the 200 to either 250 or 300, wherever we decide, you know, what's an appropriate range for them? Right now, they're at 73%. And I think, you know, that's definitely meaningfully too low, that it leaves very high cost sharing. You know, based on what other states have been doing for this population, 85, 90, 92, you know, seems to be a reasonable range for this population to target. You know, where do we want to be modeling? You know, do we want to just set actuarial values, you know, or do we also want to set lower out-of-pocket maximums? You know, the federal out-of-pocket maximum is $3,000 for those under 200% FPL, and it's $9,100 for those over 250%, and for that 250 to 300 range, it's $7,750. Are those federal out-of-pocket maxes too high? And do we want to set lower out-of-pocket maximums as part of any cost share reduction plan that we do? And then on a broader basis, you know, does the state want to consider setting out-of-pocket limitations on, you know, silver, gold, and platinum plans that are lower than the federal maximum? And you know, that would not necessarily involve funding on the part of the state. You know, we have the authority to set cost sharing limitations, and you know, it would impact the benefit design. You know, there's no free ride, and carriers still have to, you know, comply with actuarial value ranges. So, you know, if we force the out-of-pocket max to be lower, they're going to have to raise deductibles or you know, co-pays somewhere. But you know, is it a problem that people of relatively low income are expected to pay $9,100 out of pocket if they're an individual, $18,200 if they're a family? So you know, these are the kind of numbers I was hoping for feedback on. You know, any thoughts that anybody has on any of these topics would be very welcome.
Ms. Hodson?
Hi. So I would say that I would want to proceed with caution about changing those out-of-pocket maximums and things. If they are affecting the actuarial value in a way that is going to increase co-pays, because the co-pays and things that consumers are paying is the cost that they actually are incurring when they're using their plan. And so sometimes that does depend on paying down their deductible first, but not always. And so if somebody has something that is going to make the cost of using their health insurance higher, then they're less likely to use it. So I think anything that keeps the day-to-day cost of using your plan lower is more beneficial for the consumer.
Yeah, and I'd add for a little kind of additional context here, when the exchange convened the work group to examine the standard plans, we had a lot of conversations with stakeholders around, for those particular plans, you know, how do we balance co-pays and out-of-pocket maximums? And in that context, there was generally a consensus of, all right, let's try to keep co-pays and cost sharing for services down, even if that means approaching the maximum AV, so that we stay in our AV range, for the reasons Brad explained, that most people don't hit that out-of-pocket max. A lot of people are affected by their cost sharing. So that was the balance that ended up getting struck in that particular work group. However, if there were additional state funding that could be used to supplement and then reduce the out-of-pocket max, of course, that could, you know, change the equation. But that's a kind of a different question.
And isn't that part of what you're looking for, Brad, is the idea of, if we look at state subsidies and where state subsidies can be applied, is cost sharing, so support to reduce cost sharing, one of those areas where we should be looking at using state money to supplement? And then where does that play? Like if you like looking at the Massachusetts model that you provided, where you're at, you're at 97%, then 97%, then 92%, 92, and then 70 and 70. Does that look like an attractive option that we should be modeling sort of the Massachusetts approach using state dollars to get there?
Yeah, I mean, I think I confused things with my last comment about doing things without funding cost shares. But yeah, to the extent that we're setting an out-of-pocket max and funding the cost shares, yes, it's going to cost money, but the state is going to fund it, and it's going to keep the copays and deductibles by raising. And so that's the advantage. The lower out-of-pocket max combined with the higher AV allows you to, lower the out-of-pocket max without negatively impacting anything. So it was just that unfunded idea where there would need to be an offset. But the main idea here of funding cost share reduction subsidies, they're not going to be this offsetting increase. The state is going to pick up that offsetting cost, and obviously we're going to model it out. And the higher AVs we choose, the lower member cost shares, the higher that state cost. But yeah, in the funded scenario, that there's not going to be offsetting increases.
Right. So if we went back to understanding absolutely what Senator Griffith has said is right. The responsible spending and the analysis that has to be done once we have a sense of what things cost. But one of the things that I know the work group is talking about is if you're looking at what Massachusetts has done, Massachusetts has taken an approach which gets people basically to zero deductibles for all of for the first, up to 300% of federal poverty level without impacting any form of, of copay or of anything along those lines. So that the goal is to have a zero deductible for those folks. And I'm expecting that is what we will model, but that may not be the only thing that we model. And so we'll be listening and hearing, people's thoughts about, where those zero deductibles are. And for those of you, who are in industry, who are working with other states, and, have worked with Washington or worked with Massachusetts, in states that have taken this approach, we are very happy to hear from you now or later in writing where you think the modeling options should be. So any other comments on this one? I'm not seeing any hands. This is so dense. This is like math, which is like my least favorite thing to do. And anybody who is an attendee and not able to unmute, who wants to be heard. Well, in that event, nothing else, I'm going to suggest that you guys move on to the next discussion topic. So I guess next slide.
All right, so the next topic was extended enrollment opportunities. And so for this, I don't have much, the few ideas that I was throwing out there was, additional year-round SEPs. The feds several years ago created a year-round special enrollment period for people between 138 to 150% FPL. Those are the people who are eligible for $0 plans under the federal ARPA subsidy. So do we want a similar year-round SEP in our state, at a higher income level? Right now our young adults go up to 200% FPL. So do we want an SEP for 150 to 200%? So that the people that can get free plans can come in whenever in the year they want? And then, there's the possibility of additional, qualifying event type SEPs. As an example of that, a mid-year employer open enrollment, a lot of people are, in a bind where, if they, their employer insurance goes up in cost a lot mid-year, it might be cheaper for a portion of the family to go buy on the exchange, but they don't have an open enrollment period or a special enrollment period. So just throwing that out there as one example. And retroactive enrollment. Medicaid is retroactive for up to 3 months, and so a lot of people don't sign up till they actually need it. You go to the hospital, you're of the right income range, the hospital gets you signed up for Medicaid. Medicaid covers those claims, and it's not unreimbursed, uninsured care anymore. Do we need to think about something like that for QHPs, for some subset of QHPs? If the reinsurance program is acting as a backdrop and covering 1/3 of claims, obviously there is a higher risk if you allow people to come in retroactively after they know they need services, but the reinsurance program is covering part of that. So is it something that should be explored as a part of helping to achieve maximal enrollment? So these are more nebulous topics, but welcome any thoughts on this or anything similar that involves using authorities to allow people to buy. This would all be supplemental to the reinsurance and any premium subsidies. Those programs get the premium to where they need to be. This is about ways to allow people opportunities to take advantage of the premiums from those other programs. So any feedback on that type of program would be appreciated.
So Vinny?
Yes, thank you very much. Just in 2019, Delegate Cullison was one of the leaders, as you all know, in enacting the first in the nation easy enrollment program. And that's been working very well, thanks to Johanna and the Exchange for implementing it well. 100,000 people have checked the box at tax time that they're uninsured. 15,000 of them have gotten enrolled. But one piece of it that has not been implemented yet is automatic enrollment. And we've been in touch with Alyssa at Medicaid and Johanna and everybody. We just been talking with Ryan Moran now at Medicaid about applying for a waiver to implement that in 2024. I would love it if we could put automatic enrollment as one of the categories here. We believe that in any way that people who are eligible for health care, free or low-cost health care and uninsured, we should get them enrolled. I can share with everybody focus groups we did with people who were eligible for Medicaid but not enrolled, and found out that many of them just don't even know Medicaid exists. And for many who do know, there are a lot of hurdles that are tough for folks in a lot of these income categories. So we would love automatic enrollment. You made a priority. Thank you to the legislators for enacting the law this year that will try to get people enrolled who are on SNAP but not now enrolled in Medicaid. Any way we can get automatically enrolled people who are eligible for Medicaid and possibly even very, very low free ACA coverage would be great. So I'd love that to be a topic of discussion.
Thank you. Other thoughts on expanded enrollment concepts that we want to bring into the modeling? And anybody on the attendee group? Not seeing anybody in chat. Yes, Delegate Cullison.
Thank you, Commissioner. So I just wanted to ask a question, and I'm sorry that I missed the beginning of the slides. What was our experience with the special enrollment program? I mean, did the experience show us that folks were using it, and that there was continuous enrollment, or was it minimal?
That's a good question. I think we haven't done that analysis on people who've enrolled through easy enrollment. We haven't tried to tie claims to those specific individuals to test utilization, and we haven't looked at their duration of enrollment. Those are things we could do, though. I will say, sort of on a higher, kind of broader kind of color commentary, during COVID, from about March 2020 through August 2021, we had basically open enrollment in the exchange for anyone so that they could get covered, in contrast to our normal process, which is that you can enroll between November 1st and January 15th. And then outside of that, you have to have particular qualifying life events like moving, getting married, etc. During that COVID period, it's really the only time in our history where we've seen our enrollment climb as the year went on. Of course, COVID is a complicating factor and it's driving people to want to be insured. But normally we see our highest enrollment level is in January, and it falls pretty markedly over the course of the year, basically because it's easier to get into coverage during open enrollment. And then after that, it's much tougher to get into coverage because of the limitations around special enrollment. So Massachusetts, for example, allows people under 300% FPL to enroll at any time during the year if it's their first time entering enrollment through the exchange. So they sort of get a one-time pass to get in, and then they actually see fairly level enrollment throughout the year. So their people coming in is about similar to their people leaving. They don't have that big drop that we and many other states see.
So if I might follow up, Commissioner. So what I'm hearing though is that Massachusetts is doing it and they're seeing a positive impact if they're not losing folks over the course of the year. And that I think is important for us to look at because we want to keep people insured. So thank you. Thanks.
It's also, I think, important, I mean, as one of the things Delegate Colson you're pointing out is what is the additional data beyond this type of modeling that's important. It's going to be important to policymakers as you're making decisions, so that we can't lose track of that either, that what other data beyond economic modeling of costs do you want us to be providing as we go along. So that is definitely one that the working group will look into and get data from Massachusetts, and then see what kind of analysis is available to be done with what's happened with the state program so far, particularly with respect to stickiness, right? How many people come in and then do they stay? Because I think we have a lot of work to do around helping people to utilize their insurance more effectively. So, Joy Hatchett's group within the MIA is hiring consumer folks who will be literally dedicated just to doing that, particularly as the Medicaid unwind is happening and we have, people that have to navigate a new system. So that's going to be an important part of what we do. But obviously the whole issue of what you have to pay along the way, I think becomes a big value proposition for folks. And they're like, well, this is great, but how much money am I having to pay to do, the things that I want and need to do with my insurance? And that's a whole separate conversation around, the subsidies for, frankly, cost sharing that are going to get modeled. I know that we had one other person and I don't want to mispronounce your name. Is it Ms. Hugh?
Yes. Hi, Commissioner Verrain. This is Diana Shu from the Maryland Hospital Association.
Yes. Thank you.
My apologies that I actually had to miss the earlier part of this meeting, but I did want to ask a couple of quick questions about, I guess, modeling and interactions with some of the upcoming regulations that might be coming out from both Medicaid. Today, we got the great news from the Medicaid Advisory Committee that they're ready to go on the Healthy Babies Act, which is going to start July 1st, and I think their estimates were 6,000 would be covered under that. So interested to see if there's any interaction between that and the reinsurance program, even though they're technically different markets, just interested in seeing if there's any interaction. And then the other one is, and again, I apologize if Johanna's already talked about this, is the as Medicaid redetermination goes on and we get those emergency regs out of AELR and implemented, how that churn is gonna impact as well.
Johanna?
Sure. So on the healthy babies question, definitely excited to see that going live this summer. That shouldn't have an interaction with reinsurance, because for those who might be unfamiliar, that's extending Medicaid coverage to undocumented pregnant and postpartum women and babies. And so those individuals wouldn't have been enrolled through the exchange. It's possible they could have gotten covered off exchange and then been eligible for reinsurance payments, but unlikely given that they're also at Medicaid income levels. So I wouldn't anticipate that that implementation is going to have an effect on reinsurance. Brad, anything you would add to that?
No, I agree with that. And I mean, and to the Medicaid disenrollment point, yes, we're definitely, taking that into account in our modeling, and it's a source of uncertainty. But it is something that we are incorporating and have an assumption about.
Got it. When you're doing the modeling, well, given that the Medicaid, that nobody's rolling off of Medicaid, I think until the end of this month, would there be, for the next meeting, would we have like maybe a better idea of like, whether there's a significant impact, or is that going to be something that's going to be a little further down the line?
I think that's going to be a little further down the line before we have good data. And just to be clear, I mean, when we're doing modeling, we're going to have an assumption about Medicaid disenrollees, but that's not going to be a variable that we're modeling, and we're not going to be modeling different uptakes. That's we're going to have one set of assumptions regarding Medicaid disenrollees, and that's going to be applied to all the modeled scenarios, the different attachment points and structures that we model. So, there will be an economic uncertainty to all the projections, but it's going to be a consistent scenario being assumed, and we're going to be focused on modeling the structural changes and not modeling, all the different economic scenarios that could play out.
Got it. Thank you so much, Johanna and Brad.
Brett, if you don't mind, I wanted to offer one point of clarification on the churn issue as well, and just around the Healthy Babies Equity Act. So just with respect to the newborns for Healthy Babies Equity Act, we would have deemed those infants into Medicaid historically if the mother had been enrolled in emergency Medicaid. So we don't expect to see big shifts there. They automatically qualify for coverage for their first 12 months through Medicaid if they were born to a mother who's enrolled in Medicaid at the time of the birth, and that's inclusive of emergency Medicaid. So I just wanted to note that fine print because we won't see big shifts there. But with respect to the question of churn, I think it's going to take us a few months to really see how that plays out. I know I've presented on this in a few different forums, but Maryland is taking advantage of the full unwinding period, which means that we're splitting out the individuals who are up for redetermination over the full 12-month period. So, all 1.8 million people who are enrolled aren't being subject to redebt and at risk of disenrollment at the end of May. And by the same token, we fully expect, right, sometimes people may lose coverage and they come back in within a couple of months. We have a new functionality and federal authority in play called a reconsideration period that allows someone who lost coverage for procedural reasons, meaning they failed to come back in and reapply timely. Maybe they started their application, something happened with the family in the background, they didn't click send, whatever happened, and they find out a month later they lost coverage. They can actually come back in and reapply. And during that 128-day reconsideration period, if they are found still eligible for Medicaid, we will reinstate their coverage all the way back to the date that they lost coverage. So for someone losing coverage on May 31st, let's say they come back July 15th, they reapply, they're still eligible, we'll reinstate their coverage all the way back to June 1st. So I just wanted to note, Diana, that I think it's going to take us a little bit of time to see how that reconsideration period and churn come into play. We know historically it's not uncommon for someone to have had a small gap. Often they go to the pharmacy, right, or a doctor's appointment, and that's the thing that reminds them, oh, I needed to come back in and actually do that. So, but that reconsideration period is new for us with that reinstatement all the way back to that gap period, which works, is a little bit different than retro in terms of that functionality in the system too. So a lot of detailed Medicaid information, but I wanted to offer that context because I know churn is very much on many people's mind these days.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alyssa. And I think that a lot of it for me is because of the as folks, realize, for those who unfortunately realize either they actually fall off of Medicaid because their income has gotten to, beyond the Medicaid threshold. I worry, in terms of when they actually if they come up to the exchange, whether they can't afford their first premium payment or something like that, and then how that is going to also impact their the availability of access to care based on that. So it's all up in the air. Thank you so much all for the information.
Well, thank you. Other thoughts or comments on sort of this topic, but also, just very generically in other, and I know the next slide is very specifically about other market reforms, things that have either been brought up here or that you're aware of or think we should be thinking about that, we haven't even mentioned, like automatic enrollment that, Vinny brought up. Are there other things that we're missing or other comments that folks have? Yes, Ms. Clapper.
Thank you, Commissioner. So I was thinking about what Michelle Everly said last meeting about prescription drug costs. And so this isn't really a comment for modeling, but I was just thinking the Prescription Drug Affordability Board, we're lucky to have the first one in the nation. And we had advocated as an organization for them to be able to set upper payment limits for all Marylanders, regardless of payer, for very high cost drugs. And so when we're talking about all these things that we as a state can do to try to work with these really high insurance costs and make them as affordable as possible to people, I think we might be remiss not to think about the fact that, there are these rising drug costs that drive up why we have to do all of this in the first place. And perhaps it would be appropriate to make a comment about that in the report and about how the Prescription Drug Affordability Board could help with that.
Thank you. Thank you. I took a note on that with somebody gave me a pen the other day. It's my favorite pen. It's called Speak the Ruth. Sorry. A little personal there, but so any other thoughts or comments about whether it's these expanded enrollment opportunities or other things that you're thinking about that this group may not be thinking about yet? I don't see any hands up and I don't see anyone in the chat room that has asked to come over. So I'm gonna, Brad, is there anything else, or Johanna, that what have we missed? There is a last slide, Craig, that I just sort of previewed with the idea of there are a series of other kinds of market reforms. I don't know if people have thoughts about some of these other issues, like the merger of the small group and the individual market. That's something that Shane was actually always very, Chair Pendergrass was actually very always, interested in, and I know that we had provided her at least very early on in my days as commissioner with some information on that. But looks like Matt Celentano.
Thank you, Commissioner. I have thoughts about one of these proposals. So I think that we should take a closer look at Medicaid expansion. As many of you remember that are on this call, some of you weren't, but a lot of you were. Prior to the ACA, Maryland expanded Medicaid from 47% of federal poverty level to 116 of federal poverty level. It was, Maryland was severely lacking in Medicaid expansion for adults at the time. And going to 116% was a massive, massive step forward prior to the ACA. It cost about $100 million a year at the time. It would certainly cost more if we did it now because of inflation, but it was funded with a $1 tobacco tax. That $100 million with a federal match in the Medicaid program resulted in about 250,000 Marylanders getting access to coverage that they had no option to before. It was a massive, massive success. That 150, let's say it was $100 million in 2023 terms. I'm not sure how much it translates, but I do know that I think it's worth taking a look further about what would the reinsurance program and what would the individual market look like if we went from 138% to 200% of federal poverty. It surely isn't going to cost more than $200 million a year. We also are looking at a reinsurance program that is now, in the last meeting we talked about, costing $600 to $700 million in 2028. So we could cover roughly the same amount of people in expanding Medicaid from, if you track from 2009, than we are actually covering in the entire individual market right now, if we were to take a look at expanding Medicaid. Now, I know we saw on the earlier slides, I think it was the third or fourth or fifth slide, that it would be administratively burdensome. I'd like to learn a little more about that. We just covered 400,000 to 500,000 people additionally in the Medicaid program during COVID. So I don't know how it would be much more administratively burdensome. We would have to pay for it, obviously. There would be a loss of pass-through dollars for sure to the individual market. But I think we all know, and all the research shows, that there is a direct correlation between socioeconomic status and health status. Those folks that are in the 138 to 200% of federal poverty are much, much sicker. And if we were to take them out of the pool of 250,000 and move them over to a pool of, I don't know, after redeterminations, hopefully still 1.8 million people, that risk is offset in a much, much, much larger pool. And if we were to take those really sick folks out of the individual market, it should alleviate some of the reinsurance dollar concerns in the budgeting side. So I know that's not a fleshed out actuarial analysis of what could happen, but looking at historical trends and what we've done in Maryland before and what we could do with a limited source of money, I think is certainly worth exploring. So that's my 2 cents. And Vinny, I like your idea of a tobacco tax. It makes sense for public health purposes. So thank you very much.
Other thoughts or comments, either on Medicaid expansion modeling, which is sort of what we're talking about now, is what we're going to model, and any of the other ideas that are here or other ideas that you have. Delegate Collison.
Just, how did you know?
I saw your thing come on.
Right, thank you, Commissioner. So I just want to agree with Matt's suggestion and how we go about looking at this. And I think we need to look at other states that have done it. And we would not be the first. And states that we don't necessarily expect to have done this kind of expansion are doing it, and what is the impact there? So in terms of your modeling, let's look at what has happened in some states where I think the population, the socioeconomic situation of a bigger majority of the population falls into the need for Medicaid. So I really think this is something we should be looking at. And especially since I agree with Vinny that there are a number of people who, of those 350,000 total people, who don't even know that Medicaid exists or don't know how to access it. So they're not taking advantage of it because they just don't know how. So I think it's a resource that is somewhat underutilized now. And I know, you know, I'm talking about money. So, but I honestly believe that some of the costs are offset by by better health outcomes. So, you know, that's what I'm told about insurance. So I hope that's true. Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you. Other thoughts or comments, ideas, things you want to see, things that you want to make sure that the work group is addressing? Ms. Sue?
Thank you, Commissioner. I was wondering, Delegate Cullison's words brought something to mind for me about, you know, how it seems to be almost a case management question. You know, if there's a way for maybe one of the things, and I don't know how it fits into this, but just thinking about, you know, how we structure and, you know, reimburse for case management in terms of those the sickest of the sick and the most vulnerable, who are probably the ones who are unfortunately, you know, landing in our ERs when they're with extremely exacerbated symptoms because they unfortunately had a chronic illness that became acute. So just throwing that out there about a way to look at, you know, how to care for the members of the plans to sort of preemptively prevent them from having to go into the reinsurance bucket in the first place.
So I had a particular question. I mean, the individual mandate is the one thing on this list that generates revenue. And that's been a recurring theme of this call. You know, where is the money coming from? You know, from when we had the federal individual mandate and from the IRS tax data, you know, the revenue it generates is extremely regressive. It's mainly the people that are eligible for APTC, but not actually getting it, that are paying that individual mandate penalty. But is there an appetite or desire for us to be modeling that? Or should that be off the table as a revenue source?
And I would just add though, Brad, that I mean, I don't think that an individual mandate by its nature has to be regressive. A state could choose to say that, you know, there's no penalty if you're below a certain FPL. I think that's an implementation option.
I would say yes and no. I mean, I would say the data makes it so that it's going to have to be regressive. I mean, only 2% of people over 400% FPL are uninsured, where 12% of people under is. So, you know, you can have an exception, but I mean, I just think, you know, the distribution of the uninsured is going to make it so that an individual mandate penalty, even if you try to carve out low income, is going to be somewhat regressive. But, you know, maybe there's a scenario where it's not regressive, but I just think the number of people in each bucket is going to make it so most of the tax revenue comes from the lower income.
Mr. DeMarco? Vinny?
Yes, thanks. 2019, when the legislature enacted the easy enrollment law, it was originally proposed by us and Delegate Justin Penny, Senator Brian Feldman introduced it as what we call the down payment, health insurance down payment. And that was a modified individual mandate where if you're uninsured, something was taken out of your taxes, but was used to get you insured. So, and ultimately the legislature did not want to do that, but out of that came easy enrollment, which has been great. But I would recommend that if there's an interest in moving forward on that, we use this down payment approach, which addressed a lot of these issues.
So Matt, we have your comment. That's something that it would be interesting to see what the modeling would tell us among various options. And that can certainly include, you know, to Johanna's point, it doesn't have to be everyone. And it would be interesting to explore sort of, you know, what was behind the idea that if you're going to extract something, that, you know, it be extracted for the benefit of that individual. So I'm sorry, go ahead, Matt.
Thank you, Commissioner. I was just going to say, I'm not advocating necessarily either way or not. League members have been supportive of an individual mandate in the past, but we'd like to see some options, I think. So thank you.
Any other thoughts on any other of some of these reforms, the merger of the small group, an individual market, basic health plan? Seeing any hands, not seeing anybody wanting to come over. So Brad and Johanna, is there anything else that you wanted to mention, or any of the other members of the work group that wanted to provide comments or asks? So I know that we threw an enormous amount of information, that these slides were dense and intense, and you have to be Brad or Johanna to understand them, really. But dig into them, look at them. If you have additional thoughts and comments and written comments, then please send them to us. Send them to, by us, I mean Jamie Sexton at the MIA, and we will be able to incorporate those. And if you have questions about what they say, also please feed those questions to Jamie. I would normally say just reach out to Brad, but you all know that the ACA rate filings were made on Monday, and so his team is deeply involved in reviewing those right now. So I'm going to ask you to please filter your questions about details through Jamie, and then she will reach out to Johanna and Brad and make sure that questions get answered about what the slides really mean, or any of the assumptions or questions. But do get your written comments in for the first set of topics tomorrow if you can. For the second set of topics by June 9th. The path forward is to take this very rich discussion and then lay out what we're going to ask our actuaries, both internal and external, to help us model. It is not the end, right? It is the next logical step that will allow us to then begin to have those conversations about what do things actually cost? How would we tweak this? So we can talk about, well, where the money would come from. It's not the only modeling exercise that we have to engage in here, but it is beginning to put that first important step together. So with that, I'm happy to hear any additional or last minute comments by anyone who is on the line, including any of our senators or representatives, our delegates. But if I don't see anything, Senator Griffith.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to thank you for including us in this conversation. The work group and the legislation predated some of our service on the committee, but clearly a strong background in healthcare, public health, and all of the healthcare continuum. And I've listened to the comments, and I know that the work group members and those who have weighed in are deeply concerned about making sure that we provide access to affordable healthcare for all. And I think that we all understand too that means that we have some big decisions to make. And I want to just thank you all again for the slides and the presentation. I think each person that has commented has added something to the conversation. I just hope that we can get to a place where we understand that we may not be able to do all the good things all at the same time. And so I'm here as a real champion for affordable health care, and just want to make sure that the word affordable means for Marylanders as well, for those that are not in need of the services. And so, yeah, thank you for including us. This is a good process.
Well, thank you, Senator, and thank you for your contributions and for being here. Delegate Cullison.
Thank you, Commissioner. And I just want to agree with Senator Griffith and add my thanks for inclusion, but also for the intensive level of work that's been done. I know it is dense, but it is really comprehensive, and I am truly appreciating it and learning a great deal. So that will help me and help in terms of looking at different options when the report comes out. So I just want to thank you and your team and the work group for this work. Thank you.
Well, you're very welcome. And I have to tell you, obviously, we work and everybody knows really well, Brad and Johanna and their presentations. And in addition to them and their team, like, Adam and Becca, who's here, we also are so appreciative of, Alyssa and her team at Medicare and Marie Grant, who's been involved, and of course, Ben Steffen and his group. So it has been a really, truly collaborative effort, right? That we cannot be siloed. We have got to work cooperatively. We've got to work across agencies. And if we do that, we can come up with really good, comprehensive ideas to bring to you as the policymakers to then ultimately decide what direction we're going to go in. But it's really been a great team effort. And I want to thank all the members and all of the folks from the different agencies that have worked on this. And I want to thank Jamie Sexton from my team, who's been keeping everybody moving forward. So with that, Jamie's letting us know that all the materials from today's meeting, as well as those from the first meeting, can be found on our website. And eventually this video will be on the website as well. The video from the first session is already up and available. So with that, we will give you guys, looks like 43 minutes of your lives back, which I'm sure that you will appreciate, and get your comments in because we will pay attention to them. So thank you very much. And Patrick, again, thank you for being with us as well. All right, take care, everybody. Thank you.